but bringing somebody in with that experience that might not be here forever, and as long as they know that and they understand what they're getting into, they have their own plan and you support them within that plan, you set them up for success even if it means them going somewhere else.
It's something that we work with our clients on, creating those career development paths. If you want to retain the top talent that you're bringing into your team, you have to have direction for them, or else they will not stick around. They need to be inspired, they need to be excited, they need to understand what their growth trajectory looks like.
That's kind of how I think the concept of succession planning. You don't have to be a major, publicly traded organization to think about succession planning.
What is going on, Summit Chasers? Welcome to another week in review with the Summit crew. We had a very productive week. I hope that you did as well. As usual on Sundays, well, not as usual, this will probably be the first consistent one, but Sundays, we're going to talk about our takeaways from the week, what we learned, because one of our core values is grow or die. So we're always trying to learn. We're always trying to fill our cup so that we can pour into others. So we're going to talk about what we learned, some takeaways, some wins that we had from the week, and then we're going to get into a specific topic. Today, we're going to talk about how do you define a key player role. How do you define that avatar when you're trying to hire somebody to come in, take a little bit off of your shoulders, or improve an aspect of your business? How do you clearly define who that is so that you can ultimately set yourself up for success when you are bringing that person in? Where do you find them? How do you interview them? How do you differentiate them? And how do you make sure that you set them up for success when you bring them in? So that starts at defining who that person is. So we're going to break that down a little bit for you and hopefully give you some takeaways that you can go and implement in your own business as you try to bring in that key player, either your first or second or third key player. So I'm going to kick it off to, I always do this, I always kick it off to Chrissy first. I like to put her on the spot for some reason. Chrissy, what are some highlights from the week?
Yeah, so this week at work, we've been doing a lot of planning for our strategy for the year ahead. We're on talent strategy and really testing out a performance philosophy that we're rolling out. So that has been interesting to see how that works in the wild, essentially. And I think my grow or die moment this week was I had lunch with my dad yesterday, and we were talking about the role that his business played in my life growing up, like after reflecting on the podcast that you and I did, Zach. And I was just thinking about how he didn't really ever, like, it wasn't a very active conversation in our house, right? Like, it just was a thing that he was doing, and it just felt so casual and part of our lives, right? So integrated into our lives. And I was just thinking about the power of being able to talk to your children about what you're doing, if you have children, and really thinking about, bringing them along for the journey and helping them understand the importance of the work that you're doing and how it gets done, right? Like the challenges, you don't want to burden them with the challenges of running a business, but like just educating them on, how, how you're navigating, building out your career and your business. And I think that's a good life lesson for children because they're absorbing it. But I think it's important to talk about.
No, well, then at least if you talk about it, you're controlling the narrative a little bit.
Yeah.
Like you can shelter them from the things they should be sheltered from, but you can also, there's so many lessons that you can pass on to them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. No, that's great. That's something that I learned this week now. So I'm gonna add that to my grow or die moments. No, that's awesome. That's really good advice. So I want to go back to something that you said a little bit earlier though, was talent strategy. Is that what it was? Or yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So usually at the beginning of the year, I kind of take an inventory of everything that we accomplished the year before. So this is no matter what company I'm at. Usually how I use the end of my year is to think back of like, okay, what did we set out to do this year? Was it, implement a new performance management system? Is it that we wanted to hire these key roles? Did we need to do a compensation review that took a year to implement because we had to like spread it out with with budget and finance approval over the course of the year? And then I try to kind of evaluate, did we get that done? And what was the impact that had on the business? Was that exactly what we thought it was going to be? Were we hoping to of our top performers by implementing a new incentive policy, like things of that nature? And so that becomes my baseline. And I say, okay, if we accomplished, you know, like version one of this thing last year, what do we want to do to build on that for the next year so that we can start seeing year over year, you know, results and improvements and trends. And so that's really, you know, the first 2 months of this year have been really focused on what are the new things that like my business leaders, you know, I always say like, what are you losing sleep over right now? What are the top three things that you can't stop thinking about, you know? And they say, oh, I need to make these key hires, or this team needs to be, you know, we haven't gotten the performance metrics down, or we need leveling criteria over here. And so, and then I say, okay, well, that's a really big, meaty piece of work that has to get done. And so, how do we make sure that we're breaking it up and actually delivering on it? Because sometimes when these initiatives are so big in nature, it's very hard to lose track of them over the year. They feel so overwhelming that you're like, well, this is such a big piece of work to start. I need to start it when I have time. And it's very easy to like lose track of that, right? Um, and so I really try to like take an evaluation of my own like service level agreements, like my SLAs with the business. Like, did me and my team, did we deliver what we said we were going to deliver? Did it take us longer to do it than we were expecting? And so how do we kind of build that roadmap into the future? How do we make sure we're not signing up for too much, you know, that we're overcommitting? I think for all of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial minds, like you want to be able to do so much, and a year seems like it's so long. And you're like, I can get all these things done, you know, and the idea is like never stop coming, or the improvements never stop, you know, surfacing. And so for me, it's kind of like, okay, what are the things that we absolutely have to get done this year as table stakes? And there's two priorities. It's like the business leader needs something, but we also have to deliver on a year over year employee experience, because we want the team to stay. And what they're worried about is usually a lot different than what the business leaders are focused on, you know? So that's how I usually spend the first 2 months of my year, is kind of making a roadmap.
No, that's just great advice on developing a strategy in general. Because I mean, and
Mm-hmm.
you had a really great point. It's not so much that when business owners want to, they have a goal for the year or the quarter or 6 months, whatever it is, 5 years. They they do too much to achieve it, and that sounds weird, but too many different things. Like their focus is all over the place, and if you focus on everything, you accomplish nothing. But it's to narrow that. Knowing what not to do is just as important as knowing what to do. But also another like great thing that you highlighted was identifying possible threats, or
Mm-hmm.
opportunities, things that could halt that and get in the way, and challenges that could come up, and then creating, you know, plan, whether it's a plan B's or plan C's or plan Z's at some point, to overcome those things. But that's like a real strategy. A lot of times, you know, somebody's like, okay, we have a talent strategy, we have a marketing strategy, we have a sales strategy for this week. Okay, what is it? We're going to hit this goal by the quarter, and then we're going to hit this goal by Q3, and then that should put us in a good spot going into next year. And then like that's pretty much it. There's a little bit they sprinkle in there, but there's no, okay, what happens if that doesn't work? How do we do this? Right? Who do we need in order to do this? What types of guiding policies do we need to put in place to keep us on track for this? Because you're right, when there's big initiatives, it's easy to put those aside because you think, okay, I have a lot of time, or I need to wait until I have time, or I need to wait till I have the right person. Uh, so that's a great breakdown on just strategy in general. So good job. Not that you needed me to say that to you, but that's a great. I love it.
It's nice to hear it, because usually you're like so stuck in it and you're like, am I making any progress? You know? Um, but then you look back and you're like, wow, we did so much
Yeah.
in those last 12 months.
Yeah. Well, and it also depends on like there's so many different like market environments that you could be in. And like if you're in
Hmm.
a little bit more established market, like an established industry, like it might take you years to really see the fruits of, you know, implementing a strategy, right? Especially if it's a more of a long-term play. Like I think, was it Husky or not Husky? There's an oil company. I can't remember which one it was. But when they do planning, they do it sometimes like a decade or 50 years ahead of time. Like they plan
Hmm.
way ahead. Well, because it's predictable. Like other than, you know, worldly catastrophic events. right? A lot of what they can do is fairly predictable, so that would be like a classic market. But then a lot of these companies, probably a lot that that are listening to right now, they're in a more of an adaptive environment where it's constantly changing and they can't really forecast as much. So their strategy timeline might be a quarter because they're constantly experimenting and constantly adjusting and changing as the environments change. Like tech's, I mean, probably the best example of an adaptive environment. I mean, that could change, that could come in and completely change the industry, but you couldn't really see it coming unless you had the funds to have somebody go out and do research, like constant research. They call them like maverick hunters. And to find these people, to see the upcoming disruptors. But other than, like, it's very hard to change the environment, and it's very hard to forecast it. So if you're in that type of environment, like your strategy, how you implement a strategy is going to look a little bit different, like especially in timeline and speed of which you have to adjust. But for the most part, when you're coming up with a strategy, it's just do a diagnosis, analyze what's going on, and then come up with guiding policies so that you can stay within the bounds of the strategy you're coming up with, and then get your team involved in implementing like a coherent action in order to implement the strategy. But typically, I mean, again, a lot of it, how you do it is just the environment that you're in. That's going to be a big indicator of go ahead.
And I think, Zach, talking about the guiding principles of the strategy, like that's so important because you can have a plan, but there's so many things that will affect your ability to execute the plan. And the more prescriptive you are in your plan, the more overwhelming or frustrated you get, like if things don't go according to plan, or you've only charted this one detailed plan. But I think when you have guiding principles, it's totally different because they're a little bit looser. You can kind of think a little bit more around, concepts or like values or goals, like general goals, and you're less married to how you actually achieve those goals because you're still within your guiding principles. And I think that helps you have a lot more flexibility and, nimbleness of like, don't worry about don't worry about what has to change as long as you stay within those guiding principles, and on track for your strategy.
Mm-hmm. No, that's absolutely right. When you get, and you can be very prescriptive. Ugh, that was a hard one to say today. Prescriptive, right? But what happens, like Mike Tyson says, like his famous quote, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. And those guiding policies, it's almost like you falling at that point. These allow you to fall to the level or back to, I don't say to the level, but back on to these guiding policies to keep you in line. Understand the goal hasn't changed. Don't move the goalpost, but just our path a little bit. And these guiding policies allow you to stay in that and not veer off to, all right, I guess we're doing this now, or I guess we failed at this, so now we have to go over and do this. A good example of this, so there's two kind of case studies I'll give you, everybody, and kind of examples of this. And one from our own clients, they want to, what's going to differentiate them in their long-term strategy is to be fully integrated in the industry that they're in. So they do everything from they will sell the property, they will buy the property as well, and then they will tear down and build. They will build on the property. So they build houses, they build multifamily houses, they tear down and improve, they renovate, but they're fully integrated all the way from the top to the bottom, right? So that's going to be a big differentiator for them. So no matter what, they're going to that's the bounds that they're going to stay in. Like, no, we are fully integrated. We are, which allows us to be more nimble, allows us to be quicker. So communication between each of these steps and the phases can be really, really quick now. So our guiding policy is we need to have really clear communication and speed in between each of these steps, right? So like the guiding, again, that's their guiding policy, is to stay nimble, is to stay fast, right? No matter what, like that's how we run things. And as long as we don't change that, as long as we focus on that principle, the rest will fall into place, right? And the tactics that we use will change a little bit, but it's not the end all be all. The goal is the same. The guiding policies keep you within the confines to achieve the goal. Another one is Apple. When Steve Jobs came back from I forget what it was called. I always get that one mixed up. I know he started Pixar, which is cool. But wherever he was before Apple, I forget what it was. I think it's called Nexit. When he came back, they were bleeding cash everywhere. They went so wide. They were competing with Xerox. They were competing with Microsoft everywhere. They were competing with So they're competing with way too many companies that were really good at what they do. They specialized at what they do, and they were good at nothing. Like they just went blindly, grew for the sake of growing. And when Jobs came back, his guiding policy was, we are going to only sell and get involved in what we could be the best in the world at. Like what could we absolutely dominate on? They cut back their line. They had like 15 or 16 different types of PCs out there. They cut down to one. They got out of copy machines. They got out of everything. They brought everything way back. He even went and got a loan from Microsoft, which would have been crazy to be a fly on that wall during that discussion when he was talking to Bill Gates. Hey, can I have $150 million because you need me to compete with you so you're not monopoly? But that was part of his, at that time, that guiding policy within his strategy was, we only get involved in what we can be the best at, what we can change the market in. And then when somebody did an interview with him, they're like, okay, well, what's next for you? It's like, we're going to wait until we see an opportunity. We're going to wait until the next thing. And then iPod, and I hear they're doing pretty good now. But it was those guiding policies that they didn't jump the gun on going out and try to compete in a place they had no business competing in. And that ultimately was a big part of why they are where they are now. And even now, they still, like, if you look at their actual product line, it's not huge. Like it's a one page, a few different computers, and like, I don't know, it's not crazy if you compare it to some other companies where they have like 5 different pages, 3 drop downs, right? So it's like those are some examples of kind of guiding policies that'll keep you within the confines of a strategy to achieve the goal long term. Cool. All right. We spent a long time on Chrissy. Adrena, I was giving you some time to recover. Adrena had some fun last night, so I'm just going to call it out if she's not. But what was a win from the week, and what was a grow or die moment for you?
Yeah, so a win for me, I had a really great conversation on Voices of Impact that'll be coming out in a couple weeks. And it was so fascinating. She runs a nonprofit for young women with children, typically, and it's transitional living for people who are homeless. And she deals a lot with suburban poverty, and that is not something I think that is as well known. Like typically when you hear about homelessness, we all probably have a picture that we draw up in our mind, and it doesn't typically align with that homeless woman and so we had a really great conversation around that and the impact of going after what it is that you're so passionate about and not being afraid to try to be a change maker in that space. And it's led her to wanting to get into politics and all sorts. So that was a really interesting conversation that I absolutely loved. And then my go or die moment was actually seeing something that Netflix does. And I really liked this concept. I feel like a lot of times you hear companies talk about how their company has a family feel and they want everybody to be family. And they put out something that said, we model ourselves on being a professional sports team, not a family. A family is about unconditional love, where a dream team is about pushing yourself to be the best possible teammate and caring intensely about your team and knowing that you might not be on the team forever. And I really loved that concept of kind of redefining the way that people look at their coworkers and the company that they work for. And I really love the part about pushing yourself to be the best possible teammate for the rest of your team members. So that was really cool to see. I hadn't heard that before. It might be very, very well known that that's what they talk about, but I had just heard that for the first time this week and I loved it.
No, that's where did you hear that?
On LinkedIn.
It's in the book. It's in their No Rules Rules.
Yeah. I was wondering. I wasn't sure if you read that because that's exactly, well, not exactly, but that's a big premise of what Reed talks about in that book, and it's so true though. Like that's such a great thing to have learned, and I think a lot of others, business owners, leaders, need to look at it that way. Because if you always preach like family, 'cause it's like family over here. Mm-hmm. What if somebody? I mean, there's a few different things that could go wrong with that. What if somebody doesn't like their family, mm-hmm. right? What if somebody had bad experiences with their family? You know, family's not something you choose necessarily, right? For the most part, family's not something you choose. It's something you're just born into. You can't necessarily choose it. What if you had a bad experience with it within your family? And then I always like Intervention. Like Intervention's a good show. Like it was well done. I'm glad it's not on anymore as much, but it's like family will stick around no matter what in a lot of cases. Like sometimes they'll obviously they need the guy to come in or the girl to come in and be like, look, you got to draw the line and cut them off here so that they can hit rock bottom and then they can improve their lives, sort of thing. But for the most part, family will stick around no matter what you're doing. You could be failing, you could be messing up, you could be stealing from them, right? You could be a bad
Mm-hmm.
influence on, if, like your sister's bad influence on your kids. Like you'll still stick around. Uh, but in the work environment, like that's not like in a business, that's not going to set you up for success. It's just not. It's going to sound cold-hearted in a lot of ways, but and I took a lot away from hearing Tom Brady talk at a conference I was at. He was like, "Look, if you're not for the team, if we win the game and you're pissed about me not throwing you the ball, like I don't want you on the team. Like the goal is to win the championship, and we need people on the team who are bought into our core values and want the same thing. They want the same thing, which supersedes their own personal, you know, goals, mission, stats, vanity metrics, whatever it is. And sometimes that's not like it's not a thing of the family. You act like a family and a team, like you have each other's backs, and you push each other, you call each other out. So I think that's a great lesson. Chrissy, do you have any experience in kind of the difference between like the family feel on a team and then like a team like a sports team?
Well, I think it's important to think about your role as a leader and I love this concept because number one, as an individual, are you holding yourselves to the standards that a pro athlete would hold themselves to? So your agent, is only as good as you are performing, right? And so that is one way to think about your own value in the marketplace, right? Is like, are you the pro athlete that everyone wants on their team? And so as an individual, who works at a company, that is really the mindset and the ownership mindset that I think is so critical. And over the last few years, we're seeing a lot of these really big companies, shed headcount, and a lot of that has to be around the fact that I think some people have moved out of the I'm the pro athlete mindset, and the company owes me something, right? And it's a different level of commitment and accountability that people are making to the organization. And I'm not saying you have to give your entire life to that company, but it is something to say at the end of the day, the business is going to decide who they want on their professional sports team, and you better hope that that's the level you've been competing at, right? Like, or you will find yourself cut from the team. And so I think that's something, that has really resonated with me. It's a way after I read that, Audrina, in the No Rules Rules, like it really, just raised my level of self-awareness and how do I come to compete every single day at work on behalf of the company, not against each other, but like on behalf of the company as an athlete on that corporate team. Um, and then as a business owner or leader, are you the coach that pro athletes want to play for? And I think that's another level of if you had the ability to, recruit the best sports team, can you coach them? Can you develop them? Like, are you keeping yourself up to, competitive in a way that you're helping to grow their careers and make them the next, like my goal would be that everyone on my team is performing better in their job than they have ever performed in any other job before. Am I saying this is their max performance or I'm the best manager they'll ever have? Like, no, but I'm saying like my standard for myself is that every day I go to work and I compete better than I did the day before. And I want my team to really push themselves to compete alongside of me. Not the right environment, but they can opt out. That's totally okay too, right? But there's a lot of accountability that if you're going to come to work or we're going to work together, we're going to make the we're going to make the most of this time that we have, and like let's just compete as hard as we can because that's all we have to contribute.
I love the like for business owners to, and anybody really within the workforce, but to truly think of yourself as a professional athlete. Our work is our profession, so why not take it as seriously as a professional athlete takes their work? I understand that they're sometimes making tenfold what you might be at. But it's not about that. It's about showing up and doing your best every single day. Your point about, are you the coach that the star players want to play for? And I think that just having that thought will allow you to level up yourself and then make sure that you're bringing the right people into your team. If you can become that person that all the star players want to play for, you're going to have a kick-ass company, and you're going to be able to achieve so much when you get the right people around you by leveling up to yourself. So I really like that a lot.
Well, this is a good segue into kind of the next portion. But if you look at sport, like let's talk about football. The Super Bowl just passed. It was just last week, so it's still fresh in everybody's mind. So the analogy of between a business and a football team, not everybody, like if you had everybody who was like an offensive lineman on your team, who was built like that and had the abilities like that and had the IQ, like the field IQ, like a offensive lineman, probably wouldn't do very well, right? If you had everybody who was built, had the IQ, and thought like a quarterback on your team, you probably wouldn't do very well, right? So you need to have the right players in the right role. And again, one of our big kind of themes, at least from in my podcast and our themes, has been the thought diversity aspect of your business. If you have everybody on your team who thinks like you, or thinks like one person on your team and has the skills similar, you're probably like you're setting yourself up for maybe immediate success, right, when you're first starting out, because you kind of have to be a jack of all trades. You have to hire a lot of jack of all trades. But as you grow and as you scale, that's going to hold you back. That's going to hold you back big time. You're not going to be able to forecast things. You're going to make the same types of decisions. It's going to be tough to challenge each other, and you're going to miss out on a lot of other, like again, the diversity and the skill sets that other types of individuals could bring to your team. But that was again, I'm kind of cheating a little bit here. that was one of my big takeaways from the week. Is I spoke to had a lot of good interviews on podcasts with different kind of outlooks on this. Somebody on the like ageism in tech. If you're 35, then it's really hard to get hired, or if you're 40, it's really hard to get hired in that, or you're usually the first one to get let go, or whatever it is. But the importance of having somebody who has that experience on your team, that can see things from a different angle, who have lived through some of changes and adjustments and failures, and to be able to have that on the team is incredible. And then to have somebody else like females feeling like they have to be men, they have to act like men in the workplace. Why would you want that? Then they just have somebody who's just thinking the same as you do in that spot where women have could bring a very different perspective if you allow them to be, and praise them and celebrate them and their feminine energy, right? They could, again, a different perspective. They could challenge you in different ways. They could see things in different ways. So it's the importance of that diversity from, a skill set, experience, seeing things from different angles, different backgrounds. It's so important, but it could be a huge differentiator as you grow, especially when you're in that adaptive environment where things are constantly changing. You're constantly experimenting. You have to see things. You have to constantly challenge each other and see things from different angles. So that was a big kind of reinforcement for me for the week. But with that being said, into our next kind of section of the Week in Review with the Summit Crew, is when you do need to bring in a key player. Let's say you're the coach on the football team. You're like, I can't coach. I can't do the offense. I can't do the defense. I can't do special teams, right? And look at the entire functionality of the team, strength and conditioning, whatever. So I need to bring in an offensive coach, right? How do I define who that person is? Where do I start? I decided I recognize that this is what I need to hire, or maybe I don't even know who I need to hire. I just know that I need to hire somebody. I can't do it all myself. Where do we start? Don't make me have to cut this out. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'm gonna recall the exercise that Adriana did with us, which is kind of like reflecting on your own role and what it is that you feel like you're super strong at. What do you feel like only you can accomplish? As you're special. Really like who you are. So as the business owner or the business leader, people want to work with you for a reason, right? Or they want to work with your business for a reason. And so what is so differentiated and specialized that you contribute to your own business that you need to focus 110% of your time on, right? So like that to me is the first step, is like really understanding your own role that you have for yourself. And then, you know, almost like stack rank, like what's the business critical risk of delegating out the other 10 things that keep you up at night, right? So it's kind of like almost a list of like, what are the things that are keeping me up at night about the next week, the next 6 months, the next year, the next 100 years, right? Like, in the ability to like build a business that can be a legacy. And so I think when you go through an exercise of self-reflection, where do you specialize else that is weighing on you, and how do you stack rank some of that into like business criticality? I think that's the way you kind of start scoping into like, where do you need to hire, and how do you kind of pace your hiring plan, right? Like what is the key role that you actually need to accomplish? And I think that exercise is actually going to be a lot more illuminating than you are going to anticipate, of like, oh, I thought I needed accounts receivable because I can't collect on all of my, I don't know, like payments enough. But it's like, actually, hey, I need a full, senior accountant, because it's not just, receiving the money. It's like, how are we managing payroll or expenses or overhead or things of that nature? And like the reason why accounts receivable is keeping me up at night, because I can't manage all the other, cash flow stuff. That's just not a strong suit, or that's something that I feel like I'll always get to later, right? And so I think maybe just really understanding your own capacity and your own specialization versus what gaps you have across the business. So that's the first step I think I would take in understanding what the key roles are that I'd have to hire for.
I think that that's great advice, and it actually just made me think of this. She's a business owner, fitness girl on social media. Her name's Chrissy Chella, and the reason why I bring her up is she founded 2 companies, and while she was in this role, she was acting as CEO. And she was also the visionary. She did all of the creative. She played so many roles in her business. And about 2 years in, she started to reflect on what her weaknesses were and actually brought somebody in as CEO. And I don't think that that's something that a lot of business owners would even consider. But she realized that her strengths lied within being the visionary and the creative. So she now owns all of the creative direction for her companies. But she's given the CEO and the COO to somebody completely different. And that, to me, I feel like takes a strong person to realize and to own the fact that they might not be the best person in that role, even when we're talking CEO of your own company that you founded. So I think it's so important to reflect on your strengths, and to, if you truly want a business that is going to be built for longevity, be so honest with yourself and really look at, okay, this is what I'm fantastic at, or this is what I'm incredibly passionate about. And it might not be one of your strengths right now, but because you're passionate about it, you can spend the time to learn, and you'll be excited to spend the time to learn and to grow in that area. And so that's fine too. But I think doing the reflection and understanding your skill set, your natural passion within your business, and then, like Chrissy said, define the roles that you need once you understand that.
No, and this is, again, you guys both alluded to this, something that we do with our clients, something that we kind of created into a framework. And you're right, it's very illuminating, Chrissy, but it starts out, this is just the start, it just starts out with 4 questions. What are you most passionate about? What are you most valuable in? So what are you best at? And then what's your biggest weakness? And then what are you least passionate about? And then typically you have a really good place to start if you answer those things honestly. To Adrina's point, a lot of business owners don't want to admit that maybe they're not good at being the CEO. Maybe they're not good at managing people. Maybe they're not good at managing the finances. Maybe they don't like customer service. They just can't stand it. So it's really understanding where you have the most potential in and where you can add the most value in your own business. And then if you're starting out, you might only have 4 or 5 people on your team. Have them do the same thing. Because when you're in that in that spot in your business, again, more than likely, you hired a lot of, or you have a lot of people on your team who are just really bought into the vision, but don't necessarily specialize in a lot of things. And if they do, that can get lost because you're just so busy doing everything, right? So going through that exercise with your key players as well, especially if you're smaller, will be really illuminating too, because you might find out that either you're all passionate and good at the same thing and you're like, oh crap, we have a lot of gaps to fill, right? And then you might have some decisions to make from there. Very diversified in what you are passionate about and what you feel you are best at, or what you know to be best at. And now you know where you can start to place people. You can start to focus. Then you can really identify, okay, we have a gap here, right? And then also doing that from a process perspective. Where's our leaks and opportunities? What do we miss the most? Where's the biggest leaks that we miss? Why do we miss them? Is it a process thing, or is it because we all suck at this one thing? But it's simple, but it's very introspective exercise as long as you're honest. So I recommend anybody going through that, and we can link a PDF to that down below. And if you want to talk that through, it really helps to have kind of a third party talking that through with you, challenge you in a few things, maybe see things from a different perspective. We're more than happy to do that for you. So we'll leave that in the link down below. But I think that's a good place to kind of to rest on for a second here. So you've identified what you're good at, what you should be doing, right? And I like to kind of do this in an order. So it's, what are you best at, right? And especially if you're a small business, just stick with what you're really good at, right? As a business owner, if you're very good at sales, focus on that. And then how do I take 80% of my time that I'm doing other things, and push that over to sales, what's going to get us the biggest return on investment. But like, how do I decide where I should hire first? Like, where, like, really, I could be passionate about something, I could be best at it, but then there's something that I'm not necessarily all that good at, or I'm just not really passionate about. How do I kind of combine all those answers and then create, okay, I should hire here next?
Well, I think that's really like, what's the most critical thing for your business to keep running, right? So if you were to take 80% of your time and focus on sales, what isn't getting done? And what do you need in order to keep the business going, right? And so I think that to me is where you start saying, okay, this is my first critical hire, or I need to hire these 3 roles order. So, okay, I'm going out and I'm selling and I'm closing business, but there's no one doing the customer service or the client onboarding piece. Okay, well, you could sell all day long, but if no one's there on the other end to help, get the client onboarded and start delivering the work, that's the first role that you have to hire in order for you to be able to go spend 80% of your time focusing on a lot of what happens too in businesses is when you have multiple roles open at the same time, what tends to happen is like you'll go to fill the easiest job first. And that might not be the most critical hire for you, right? And so I think there's a whole issue around how are you prioritizing like multiple roles. That's a similar parallel track is like, you can kind of get burnt out working on these really hard roles to fill, right? Because you're like, all right, I need to define this role, or I don't even really know what it takes to hire someone like this. Like, this is such a weakness or a gap for me that, like, I don't even know how I would define this job description, or other than solving this problem, what does the rest of the work look like? How do I start, attracting a talent profile that I need? And so, I think that's when you will want to kind of pull in either from your personal network or, professional network. If you're looking for an accountant, let's say, and you don't even really know what an accountant should be working on, that's when you start to kind of go to your, a network of people who can help you think through, here's 4 different profiles for accountants. And depending on, your type of business, you might need an accountant who specializes in, revenue recognition, or the entire profit and loss statements, or, depreciation aspect of work, right? If you, depending on what's happening. So I think that's where it's like, don't be afraid to ask for help, especially in the areas where you realize it's a blind spot for yourself. And so you want to go out and be able to hire that A player, that professional sports team member, and you might not be the best judge of character on what that profile looks like, or what requirement should be in place for that talent. So I think that's also something where you just have to have the self-awareness of like, if this is something I don't know, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
No, that's great advice. I have a good example of what not to do. I had a client that they had brought in a fractional CFO, and they weren't clear on what it truly was. They knew they needed help with, their accounting and finances and their books, basically. And so they brought in this individual who had a great looking resume, but he was more of a tax guy. Like he was very good at that aspect of things, getting the taxes right and paying Uncle Sam what he needed to be paid, sort of thing. But what he wasn't good at was like the forecasting aspect, was negotiating with partners. He wasn't what they needed. On paper, he looked great, but he wasn't the one. He didn't have the skills, didn't have the experience, he didn't have the specifics to achieve the specific outcome that they wanted. It ended up being a huge miss, and that can cost, especially in that type of role, that can cost you a lot of money. And the unfortunate thing is, it's not extremely calculable what you could be what you're missing, right? It's not, okay, we just lost this amount of money and we can see it in front of us. It's, what did you miss out on because you weren't forecasting these things? What did you miss out on because you didn't take advantage of these opportunities in your market? So being really, really clear on what they need to accomplish is kind of the next step, which we'll get into next week. But I love one of the points that you made was, if you're really good at sales, look at if you're leaving customer service, a little bit leaner, then maybe that's where you need to focus on, because you're going to bring in an influx of clients or customers, and you're not going to be able to fulfill on them. And we get so lost in like these sexy positions, right? And this is one thing that we're kind of battling at Summit Chasers, is there's the shiny objects. Like there's so much, like the marketers that have these really, it's beautiful because they're creatives, right? It's sexy. Marketing is in a lot of places, in a lot of industries, and from a lot of frames, it's sexy. It looks cool, and it brings in clients. And there's just a bunch of tactics. We have AI we can use for this. There's funnels. There's copyright. Like it's a fun thing. So it's really easy to get lost in those types of roles and those types of offerings, when really what you need is just a really solid individual that can come in and bolster your customer service, that you can fulfill on your product or service or whatever it is. And it's hiring for those foundations, hiring to lay a solid business foundation, and not just to stack more bricks on top of each other. All right, so it's looking at like the full base of your business. Now, what do I need right now to turn this thing into a rock solid foundation, so that I can scale upon it, so that I can build upon it, so I can, and that goes right down to the type of people you bring on. And we go back to like the thought diversity. I want somebody who can come in and be a really strong leader in this department. Like I want somebody who can come in and have, is really good at teaching and coaching empathy as a customer service manager, to teach and create a foundation of, whatever our core values are, whatever the guiding principles are, to really clearly fulfill and over deliver on our product and customer service department. So who does that need to be, and create that foundation, so when you do bring new people in, they have this strong individual in that role that can coach them and train them and build it to where you want it to build. So just be really intentional, not getting lost in what's sexy, and look foundationally, especially when you're starting out. And that goes right down from what role you're hiring for, the type of individual in that role, what experience that they have, and what you want them to accomplish.
Zach, you had Rob on a couple weeks ago on the podcast, and he was talking about the importance of, like, someone comes into the company and they want to stay for multiple levels, right, of their career. And I think another thing is, when you're thinking about what key roles to hire, don't think too short term. Like this is work that, look, you might have work that needs to get done for 6 months because you just need cleanup done, right? And that's okay. And maybe that isn't a full-time employee. Like maybe that's a contractor or someone who comes on a temporary basis just to help kind of get things back in order. But when you're thinking about hiring, key players for your business, you have to be able to chart that this job exists at your company for 2 to 5 years out, and what does the progression look like, right? So that what you need today, but how does that look for this person in 18 months from now, what does it look like once they hit those thresholds? What does the next challenge look like for them? And so I'm not saying you need to completely own that person's, career journey within your organization, but because if you have a key player, they'll really probably create a lot of that opportunity for themselves, and a lot of opportunity for your business that you didn't even anticipate, right? Because you brought in some thought diversity angle. But what you do need to be able to guarantee is that this job will exist, 2 to 3 years from now in the way that you're thinking about it. Because another thing is, don't take it lightly to hire someone in your organization. That person is leaving either another another stable position, that they're walking away and kind of giving up their livelihood, right, to come work for your organization. That's a very big responsibility that you need to take seriously as a business leader, especially when you're hiring talent. And then, which I think also is why you kind of slip into the whole like, we're family, because now you're like, I'm solely responsible for this person's ability to like feed their family or, grow their family, etc. So you definitely need to make sure that you're hiring the right people, because that's a long-term relationship. But yeah, I think just not like really owning the responsibility of asking someone to come work for you, for the next few years. That person's also really coming with the expectation that they're going to get the skills that they need to be able to grow their career. Like, they're thinking about their career for 30 years. It doesn't have to be with your company, right? But, they want to make sure that whatever they're getting out of this next experience with your organization, that it's going to set them up for future opportunities as well. And so there is that value exchange that you have to make sure is in place, as a business owner, and the talent in the marketplace.
Yeah, that is a fantastic point. It has to be mutually beneficial for on both sides. And I think it's something that we work with our clients on too, is actually creating those career development paths, because it's so important. If you want to retain the top talent that you're bringing into your team, you have to have direction for them, or else they will not stick around. They need to be inspired, they need to be excited, they need to understand what their growth trajectory looks like within your business, and know that it's not just the one role that you brought them in for. So I think it's so, so important, like you said, to build out that career development plan, have an understanding of what the path looks like. If they come into this role, what's their next level? What do they need to achieve in order to reach that next level? And then what's the next level after that? So always be thinking ahead. That's also how you're able to chart your path in growth and success along the way. It doesn't just go with hiring, it goes across the business in general. When you have your mission that's set for maybe 5 years from now, and this thing that you're trying to achieve, or 10 years from now, you're always looking ahead and playing the long game. I think when, like what Zach said, if we're going with the shiny object syndrome, that's like those quick hits, those quick fixes, get rich quick, all of those things. It's like, no, you have to constantly be playing the long game, build a foundation in order to set your company up to succeed long term.
And this is why it's so important to just be really intentional with your strategy. You might not, maybe sometimes you might need to bring in somebody to just get a department up and running, or develop the people that you have in a department so that they can be set up for success long term. So again, going back to the sports analogy, sometimes this happens a lot in hockey. I'm sure it happens in football and other sports. I just know hockey better, where they will bring in a veteran who is maybe, in the last 3 to 5 years of their career, to come in and give that leadership support, to give that experience to the younger player, be there for a season or two, right? And especially if you have younger, more inexperienced but talented individuals on your team, they will do that, right? Especially if you're on like a playoff run, or you're about to be in the playoffs, right? It's good to have those individuals on your team to pass on that experience. They might not be the most talented anymore, right? Or just like physicality in this analogy for hockey, but what they can pass on to the younger players is so important for your long-term success. So this can happen. Like if you're blowing up your sales, and all of a sudden you're like, we need customer service to be up and running. I have really talented people in here. They just haven't had to deal with something like this before. They haven't had to scale a department before, but they're extremely good at what they do. They're extremely bought into the mission. They're company first, right? They're the right people we just need to get them to kind of that next level, bringing in and having them even hire their own boss, having them bring it in and help you bring in that person to help guide them, to be that support, to have bring that experience and to bring that structure into that department, into your company. But if you do that, you have to be honest with that person, like up front, like this is why we need you here, right? So then this is the outcome that we need you to accomplish. When we do accomplish this, what are you wanting to do with your career? Where are you wanting to go with your career? This is where we're looking to go. Is this something that you're up for doing? And then when this is in place, are you okay with moving over into this role or whatever that is, right? And you never know. Maybe they'll stay in that position forever. I don't know. But it's being really intentional and being upfront and honest with them. But again, like this, you don't want to. I just don't want people to hear this and feel like, okay, if I hire somebody, they have to be here for 5 years, type of thing. That might not be your strategy. Your best case strategy, right? It's tough, and that's a tough thing to do. And this isn't going to happen. It's not like a super common thing, but it is a good hack. You have great key players right now. They're just inexperienced at dealing with maybe a huge influx of clients, or developing a sales strategy in this type of market, especially for startups, right? But bringing somebody in with that experience that might not be here forever, and as long as they know that and they understand what they're getting into, and they have their own plan, and you support them within that plan, you set them up for success, even if it means them going somewhere else, then that's what you have to do. But do it authentically, do it with empathy and honesty.
And that's a talent strategy too. It's called succession planning. And so sometimes you have to take a look at your organization today. Who do you have? Who do you not have? Who's ready for that role, but maybe not until another 2 to 3 years? And what does that person need? Like, if you want to invest in that person to grow into the role that you think that they deserve to be in, or that you think the company would really benefit from them being in, you have to have a plan on, like, how are you going to bridge the gap over the next 2 to 3 years to help them get the development, the experience that they need to be successful when you want them somewhere 2 to 3 years from now. So that's something we do all the time, in organizations and in the corporate world, is we talk about succession planning, and we look at all of our leadership roles, and we say, okay, who's ready now? Like, because also, that person might win the lottery and leave, right? And that role becomes vacated, or something else could happen, so you're like, you want to make sure that you don't have a major gap. So right now we're talking about who to hire, because we're almost framing it in the essence that you're like, wow, this is scaling in a way that I need to move out of some of the work. You might also already have a really established organization, and you are like maybe a little bit too comfortable that you don't have a plan if one of your key roles gets vacated unexpectedly, right? And what is your plan to hire in that case, right? How do you make sure you understand, well, this was the person that we had in this role for the last 5 to 10 years. They are doing an amazing job. But if this role was vacated, how would we reimagine what this work looks like for the next 5 to 10 years? Who's ready to take that? Maybe you have someone who's ready in 6 months. Maybe you have someone who's ready in 12, 18, and we look at it in a 6-month basis in the corporate world. So we say, who's ready in 6 months? Who's ready or like 6 to 12 months, 12 to 18, 18 to 36, and we kind of identify where are our gaps. So do we have someone who could take over today? Do we have someone who could take over in 6 months, to keep that internal pipeline going? That's when we also start thinking about, okay, how do we start understanding who's in the marketplace that we would want to start building relationships with, or how do we start networking in these areas to start building external talent relationship pipelines, so that when we do have the need to hire externally, they already know about our organization, they already know about the work that we do. You can't start networking when you need to fill the job. This is like, you're way too far behind. And then that's where I think people start panicking. They hire for available talent, which isn't necessarily the pro athletes that they want to bring into the organization. People who are the pro athletes are usually working. And so you have to build relationships with passive candidates, that's what we call them, who like people who are not actively looking for a role. Active candidates are like active job seekers who are applying to roles, people who have jobs and they don't even know there's an opportunity out there for them, right? So that's kind of how I think the concept of succession planning. You don't have to be a major, publicly traded organization to think about succession planning. Like if you have 2 or 3 employees, like you should start thinking about succession planning because you've already distributed the work in a way that you wouldn't be able to close the gap in the future. So you would need a plan, a business continuity plan.
Sorry, Adrina, you unmuted. You got something to add?
I did. I was just going to say that opens an entire other line of discussion, because I think with succession planning, you better make sure that your processes are documented. Because if that knowledge, if there's this one just all-star player in that role and the knowledge is all up in their head, if they leave for whatever reason, you have got to be prepared for that. And in order to be prepared for that, you have to make sure that all of the processes are documented. I think there's something so important about truly making sure that no one person is so valuable to your company that if they leave, it's game over. So I think always planning and thinking again ahead, long term, making sure that you're set up to handle those situations. So like I said, that's an entirely other conversation.
No, that's a great point. And yes, there's many other conversations that we need to have that will stem off of this one. But absolutely, you don't want, when a key player leaves, or anybody to leave, and then that next person to come in, now all of a sudden that job is done totally different. All of a sudden now that the experience for your customer or client in that area is totally different. There needs to be a ton of continuity that's in line with your company core values and principles, and just in your market message as well. But yeah, you're right. That's another weak thing. But to kind of just circle back off of Chrissy's kind of point, is when you are doing these succession planning, like you don't need to be a huge company in order to do this. You shouldn't be, right? You should be setting yourself up for success long term right away. And again, this goes back to the foundations. And I think doing that exercise with your team that we talked about at the beginning, which is having them answer those questions, honestly answering those questions, and workshop the questions with a piece of paper, and then like, hey, hand it in on Monday. Go through it with them, challenge them on it, which is, again, what are they most passionate about? What are they best at? What are they worst at? What is their skill lacking the most in? And what are they the least passionate about? And then when you do that, you can identify, okay, is this where you want to go? Like, what do you want to achieve? And there's the commitment sheets that we do with our clients when we onboard with them. We get them to do with their people as well, which is like, what do you actually want to achieve? Like, where do you want to go? Where do you see yourself, in 5 to 10 years? What kind of life do you want to live? Specific. Like we challenge our clients and their teams on this one. It's, if you want to have financial freedom, what does that look like for you? Like, what does that mean to you? That means something different for everybody, right? You want to have $1 million in the bank, or do you want to have $50 million in the bank? Because those are very different things. Those are different skill sets you need to achieve those, right? But being really, really clear on that with them, and then you have that conversation. Okay, so this is where we want the company to go. Right, you know what the mission is. You know how big we want to be. You know what we want to achieve for our clients and in our communities. If this is the role that you want, then we need you to be at this level. Right. So what do you need in order to get at this level? And sometimes that a lot of time, most of the time, that means a mentor. That means somebody that can come in, whether it's from a third-party consulting service, coaching, or it's bringing somebody in. Best case scenario, realistically, is to have somebody that can come in and partner with you to develop these people internally. And then that's your succession, but being really clear on what that is first. And then again, you can either bring in somebody like us who will come in and partner with you to do so, or if it's something that you're lacking big time and it's a very specialty role in a very specialty niche department, then bring in that master, bring in that veteran, so to speak, and develop them. But again, you have to have all the honesty. Planning ahead of time. This is what we need you to accomplish in this role. When you do accomplish that, we're currently unsure of where you want to go, but what do you want to achieve? Where do you want to be? What type of, if there's somebody that's close to retirement, like where do you want to retire? How do you want to retire? And what time frame? All this kind of stuff. Or somebody who wants to move on to working for Yahoo or something. Like what skills do you need to develop? What kind of help do you need from us? And set them up for success. Whether they're with you or not. I'll wrap this part up. But going forward, we're going to be a little bit more cyclical with our discussions that we have. So obviously today we're starting from the beginning. Who should you hire? How do you define your own role? How do you define the type of person that you should be bringing into your company? Being really intentional with this and being really intentional with where your team's at, what they're most passionate about, where their skills are, where your skills are, what you're most passionate about, and where you want your company to go. Having that clearly defined, so you're not just hiring and growing for the sake of growing. You're not hiring based on, they have a cool resume. I need more marketing just because somebody told me to. Like, being really, really intentional with what you're missing and the gaps that you have, and build that foundation. Don't get stuck on all the shiny object syndrome. Build that business foundation that's going to set you up for future success long term. So I'm assuming if you're listening to this and you started your business, it's because you had a long-term goal that you're trying to accomplish, whether it's that you can sell the company for huge profits, you can go public, or you just want to have a very successful mission accomplishing business that changes the lives of you, your family, the people on your team, and your community. But speaking of small businesses that want to change the lives of them, their families, and their communities, Chrissy always brings to these Sunday talks a business that she wants to highlight, and I'm going to let her take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So today I'm repping Rock Hair Salon, which is actually my hair salon. This is run by Patricia Silva. She started this about 2 years ago right here in Rockaway Beach. The shirt says, "Dust my ends and bleach my roots." Does a lot of balayage and a lot of curly hair haircuts. So I just want to give a shout out to Patricia and the Rock Hair Salon and all of our small business owners and all across the country and in Canada.
Thanks for throwing in Canada. I appreciate that. That was very nice of you. Beautiful, everybody. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us on this Sunday. Next week, we're going to go a little bit deeper, well, quite a bit deeper into really defining that avatar. So now I know where I need to hire. Now you're really clear on, okay, this is what I'm missing. This is what's going to help set up my business with the foundations to scale and grow in the future. But now, how do I define who that person is? And then after I define who that person is, the avatar, I know exactly who they are. I feel like I know them already. But now, where do you find them? And we're going to go over that next week. Does anybody else have anything to add? Any parting words for our watchers or listeners?
Keep chasing your summit.
She took it from me. That was beautiful. But thank you so much, everybody, for watching. If you're on YouTube, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. If you're listening to this, which you probably aren't, because I'm not sure if I'm going to put this on just audio yet, but if you are just listening, go check out the YouTube channel, Summit Chasers Productions. Make sure you subscribe, put the bell on so you can get notifications. But until next time, everybody, keep chasing your next summit.